No, they're better than that.
Turtle soup.
Okay, we're live.
Right.
This is Senate Appropriations, May 23rd. We don't have a bill. We've got the budget passed and signed by the governor, so we're doing some other updates that we weren't scheduled before, but we're fitting in. So today we have Agency of Education today's update on federal funding.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much for having us. Jill Briggs Campbell, Deputy Secretary of Education. And Anne, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. For the record, Ann Bordenero, I'm the Director of Federal and Education Support Programs at the agency. So pretty busy these days.
Yeah, so it was great. We wanted to come in and, we've been sort of in periodically throughout the legislative session. As Ann said, things are, we'll just say, lively in Washington, D.C. And just wanted to sort of give you an end of session update on where things stand with education funding. I suspect that things will continue to be lively right off the bat starting next session. So just want to kind of lay some of the groundwork of where we're at and where we think we're heading. I was telling Senator Perchlik that I would characterize this testimony as the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I think we can start with the good, which is Anne. Anne, you get the good and the bad, and I get the ugly today.
Yeah.
And we've got the written testimony, and we actually have some timely updates as of,
There's written testimony on the website, but I'm sure it's mostly text, so if you just go over it, there's one table.
Sure. Sure. So I'll start with the best news of all, which is that we did receive on May 14th our Title I allocations for school year 25-26. This is money that was appropriated in the continuing resolution back in March. It's actually federal FY25 money, but because of the way education programs are funded at the federal level, which is forward funded, this is actually the funding that will carry us through next school year. So that is great news. The total dollar amount was roughly what we were expecting when we were told that Title I was level funded in the continuing resolution. The team, our consolidated federal programs team, is now in the process of doing the calculations that they have to do to that overall state allocation and the different school district allocations in order to load those into the applications for people to budget against. So there are mandatory set-asides and hold harmless amounts and all that we have to calculate at the state level. They're almost done with that. Meanwhile, we had loaded what we anticipated to be their hold harmless amounts a couple of weeks ago so that folks could start working on their grant applications. So that is ongoing, and as soon as these new numbers are actually calculated, we will load them instead of, replace the hold harmless amounts that we had loaded sort of as placeholders, but they're not very different. We've been told that we will get our final Title I allocations on July 1 and October 1 as required under the law, so that's very good news. In terms of the other programs that come under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that are called title programs, so Title II, 3, 4, McKinney-Vento, Title V, we do not have those allocations yet, and unfortunately, although we've been told they're basically going to be level funded, there's no promised timelines for when we're going to see those. We have meanwhile loaded 80% of each district or supervisory union's last year's allocation in the anticipation of level funding, so people can go ahead and build their budgets. But I'm going to remain anxious until we actually see the allocations. They're saying they're not going to do preliminaries like they did with Title I. They're just going to go straight to final allocation. So we may not see anything till July 1 or after. We just don't know. In terms of IDEA, we did get our school year 25-26 awards, which is fabulous for both the 619 program, which is the smaller of the two, that's the additional pre-K component, and then the 611 part, which is the bigger program that covers age 3 to 21. We received roughly what we were expecting from level funding from last year. We also are working with our vendor to finalize that application in the system, and we can load the allocations once the vendor finishes what they need to do. So that is good. So folks can begin to build their budgets for IDEA.
What
We
is
also-
ID?
It's the individual with disability.
Disabilities education.
So it's for special education.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. We also received our Perkins, which is our career and technical education federal allocation, 2 weeks ago. And the team did their manipulations that they need to do and has sent each CTE center a notice of what their award is going to be for the next school year. And those grants are also waiting for some final work by the vendor in our grants management system, but should be ready, if not today, certainly by Tuesday. So that's also good news. That rounds out our and I didn't put it on here, but adult education and learning also it gets an award from the federal government. They have not yet received their allocation, which is approximately $1 million. And we are waiting to receive that. That
I think,
go ahead,
yeah, so Anne, before you go on to the next section, which is the quote unquote the bad. So I think what we're signaling here is that by and large, with the exceptions of some of the other title programs and AEL, our districts have, by and large, their federal funding for the next school year. So that is good news. And that is the good news. That's the basic functioning of our federal government. It's a low bar, but it's an important one to cross. So now we're going to be looking at the following. So the federal fiscal year 26, which for us would be the school year 26-27. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Anne.
Yes. Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jill. That was really helpful summary. So the White House has released what they call their skinny budget. You might have read about that in the news about a week ago or 2 weeks ago at this point. That's basically their summary of what's going to be their federal FY26 budget, which will be much more detailed in the coming weeks. There are some concerning things in there. I'll just indicate there are proposed elimination of Title III, which is the federal program for grants to districts to support the education of English language learners, the elimination of migrant education, adult learning, preschool development grants, teacher quality partnership grants, as well as cuts to Perkins for CTE, which struck all of us as odd because it doesn't seem to align with other priorities of the administration, which seem to be focused on workforce development and all. But in any case, the budget also proposes consolidating IDEA, the special education funding, into one single block grant, which would be level funded under this proposal, and ESEA into two grants, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, into two grants. One would be Title I, also level funded. The other would be a consolidated block grant that would cover 18 other formula and competitive grants, although those have not been specified as to which 18 we're talking about here. There's also a proposed cut of about $4 billion for those unspecified 18 other programs. It's really important to recognize that this is just the opening salvo in FY26 budget negotiations. These sort of outlined principles of the White House will go to House and Senate appropriations, who will need to come up with top line numbers, and then it will go to all the different authorizing and appropriating committees. And what comes out of that could look absolutely different than what the White House has proposed in this skinny budget. So you'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks. We just don't know how that's going to play out at this point. But the other thing, to step back just one step here, is that there is a third process going on, which is the remainder of federal FY25 funding that was considered mandatory, which is actually the majority of the budget, and that is being, they're trying to wrap up with the big beautiful bill or whatever that just passed yesterday, which is also known as the reconciliation bill. Reconciliation because in this case, they are moving forward with this bill through a process in the legislature called reconciliation, where they can pass it with just simple majorities in the House and Senate. And so basically, if they keep all Republicans in line on these bills, they will be able to move it through without needing any Democratic support. The reconciliation bill, the big beautiful bill, is concerning. I'm sure you've heard this from other folks before, but it proposes substantial cuts to the House version, at least, that just passed yesterday, proposes substantial cuts to Medicaid and changes in eligibility requirements, work requirements, for example, increased work requirements, changes to the state share of Medicaid funding, which effectively would be a cut, a variety of different changes to both SNAP and Medicaid. And we are very concerned about that process because not only does it affect our students if their eligibility for Medicaid is harmed in any way, then we will have fewer students who have healthcare protection. But also, we use direct certification of students for eligibility for free and reduced price school meals through Medicaid as a metric of poverty. And so if those numbers change or our ability to directly certify students changes because Medicaid eligibility is reduced, it will have knock-on effects down the line on a number of our other programs. So I can explain more about that if you like. At this point,
Anne, would you mind talking about the potential implications, even though we have a universal school meals program, the implications of that change in direct cert or the cost of the program?
Sure. So it's several steps indirect. So first of all, we don't know, I say we don't know at all what the Senate's going to do with this bill that just came out of the House. So they could radically change it. But if there are, assuming that there are some cuts to Medicaid, first of all, we don't know if those cuts would be for those students who are in families at 185% or below of poverty, 130% or below, or above 185%. If they're to families who have incomes above 185% of poverty, we should see almost no impact on our numbers because we calculate poverty in the state and the federal government calculates eligibility for free and reduced price meals based on the 130 and the 185% cutoffs. So if it's just children above that, then we won't see any impact. If it does start to impact families, either because they just can't deal with all the new paperwork or the work requirements or whatever, and it's families that are in those 5% or below categories, then they are not going to necessarily be eligible for Medicaid. So our numbers coming to us from the Department of Health will be lower. And right now we get those numbers directly, and we don't have to ask those families to provide any kind of documentation of their income. We get SNAP information and we get Medicaid information directly from the appropriate agencies. And the majority of our children who are now considered free and reduced price meal eligible are being identified through these what we call direct certification processes, which don't involve any interaction with parents and paperwork. So if there were fewer children residing in families that qualified for either or both of these benefits, there would be fewer of them coming to us through these sharing of data. We could still ask them to demonstrate their income through forms. The problem is twofold. One, that people are used to not demonstrating income through forms since 5 years now. So getting compliance with forms is going to be very difficult. The other thing is that reintroducing forms reintroduces a lot of paperwork and administrative burden to our school districts. So in terms of the cost of the meals program, that will be a bit down the road potentially because we have protections built in under the USDA rules that say that once you've established a level of poverty to operate either a CEP program, community eligibility program, or a Provision 2 program, those are two options for running your meals program. Those numbers carry for a certain number of years. So the poverty numbers that we currently have will carry for a certain number of years, even if they go down, for example, next year or the year after. Rosie Kruger can explain in a lot more detail which schools are at what place in those cycles, and what school year might kick in. But that is a good thing, is we do have that rule, and to change that rule would require a rule change, a federal rules change. You can't just issue an executive order to get rid of this requirement in the law.
That doesn't seem
So-
to stop.
Could take a while to make a rule.
Yeah, but I think so, and you did a really good job of explaining a really complex process. But one thing that's sort of foundational here is that our universal meals, the current cost in our state budget is $17 million a year. But that is reliant on the fact that we draw down significant and advantageous federal funding. That Anne was just describing, where we have sort of this protection and kind of a nice deal with the federal government right now. So it's something to bear in mind, future states, why we're bringing it to appropriations, right, as you all are looking future
That's
states.
how it got passed, is because we knew we could, and we thought over time we'd be able to draw more as we got more parents to fill out the form that didn't normally fill it out.
Yeah, that's right. So it's just something we're sort of laying out considerations for you so that you've got those kind of things in the back of your mind, future state, as additional changes may come. But one of those places is universal meals. Another place is the fact that our, those federal programs that Anne is describing, Title I is a program to support students in poverty, and it's driven by the number of students in poverty, right? So the more challenging it is to identify those students, or if their eligibility changes, then there are those downstream impacts in the amount of dollars, in addition to those risks of just flat out reductions in the amount of money that is budgeted for title funds and IDEA and Perkins and all of those other programs, future states. So it's something. There's always, as Anne was saying, there's these knock-on impacts of these changes in requirements because of the way that identifications of federal poverty are tied to so many other things. Yeah.
One other
So
good protection that we have, well, just in terms of what you said earlier, Senator Perchlik, we actually have seen the cost of universal meals go down steadily year on year since we started the program, precisely because we've done such a good job directly certifying students, identifying students who are eligible for free or reduced price meals through our data sharing. So that is great news. In terms of one other small sort of protection is that the figures that the federal government uses to determine overall allocations to states for things like Title I and IDEA actually come from census poverty, not from meal eligibility. So, that's sort of a protection. In fact, those might go up if some of these other things happen, with tariffs and all. Those numbers might go up, which would affect us in a different way. So that's also, those are not how we identify students as poor locally for our weighting system and all the rest. We rely on free and reduced price meal eligibility, but at the national level, when we get our allocations, they're based on these national census figures. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I am wondering about two separate issues that I feel like I'm hearing. So one is the bigger issue of being able to draw down federal dollars. But the other one I'm hearing is the need to be able to identify who would qualify.
Yeah.
And so what is the reasonability or not reasonability of just having data from the tax department disclosed to you all to identify who those people might be? And if you could do that, would that be useful?
Anne, has your team explored that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, our data team, along with child nutrition, has explored this extensively and ruled it out. Basically, we need to know at the level of individual child who is and isn't eligible for a free or reduced price meal. So there's a number of problems with tax data. Number one, a lot of low-income people don't file taxes, so we'd miss them altogether. Number two, we're looking at households, which is defined differently in tax law than in USDA law. So So we might get a number for a household defined by tax as, below a poverty line, but that wouldn't necessarily correspond to all the children living in that household. We wouldn't know who those children are, first of all, necessarily. And number two, we wouldn't necessarily know which ones, like in the case of a foster child, or, there could be a foster child within a home that is not otherwise poor. There's a lot of ways in which we have looked really, really hard at tax data. We wish it was able to solve our problems. That would be great, but it isn't. It's just collected in a very different way with different data definitions than what we need for both ESEA federal compliance and USDA federal compliance.
So especially in the face of the loss of data effectively, you don't think that because it sounds like it would be imperfect data. It would be similar, but not quite right. It sounds like as you say, you've explored it extensively, but I'm wondering, in the face of the loss of this data, if it wouldn't be useful to say, well, we've got some partial data, or we could supplement that data with some, additional self-certification or, something like that would make it fit.
I'm wondering if there's sort of two different issues as well. So one is the requirements for federal definitions of poverty and what those requirements are. And we may be bound and constrained by those, right? Like how we provide that information. And then the other one, I think that Anne was sort of signaled briefly was our own education system relies on weighting students based on poverty. And it's actually spelled out in statute right now, how we identify those. And it doesn't contemplate tax data. It does contemplate like direct cert and household income form and free and reduced lunch status. So there is other ways to do it. We may, in the face of, if there are significant changes to like direct cert eligibility or that sort of thing, and is it a true statement that we may just need to really invest in those like fill the form campaigns, which in the past have not been particularly successful, but we maybe need a state concerted effort to get that messaging out? That might be the way that we accomplish that.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. We would have to just really up the public messaging across the state about why this is suddenly so important.
We're almost the victim of having been really successful at using direct cert, right? Like we did a really good job and we were able to capture a lot more students in poverty. And now sort of the legs are being swept out from under that effort. So, yeah.
Medicaid.
Okay. Yeah.
We've been really good at Medicaid.
We've been really good at
Medicare,
Medicaid.
so we've been
Yeah.
the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so we're hoping we won't get to that point where, that whatever comes out of this reconciliation process, for example, will protect Medicaid for children under 185% of poverty, for example. That would solve all our problems. But we just don't know. So.
And was there anything else in the bad portion, or are we ready for the ugly?
No, go ahead. I'll keep going.
Okay.
I'll ask one question.
Sure.
Okay, so now we get to my part. I might just grab it just for the numbers fit. So our final update is around the ESSER funds and the late liquidation.
What is late liquidation?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back. So under the previous administration, with the ESSER funds, right? So those COVID era funds, there was ESSER, there's some GEAR funds with the governor, there's homeless children and youth, there's whole alphabet soup, right? And all of those funds, the period of performance, right? And when you could use those dollars ended on September 30th of 2024. The previous administration offered an expansion of an existing federal discretion, which is called late liquidation. And in any normal federal grant, say title or any other federal grant, there has always been this process in place that's an acknowledgement that sometimes the closeout of a grant, which is literally the receipt of invoices, right, and the payment of those before the final closeout date, that things can happen, right? And there's always been this discretion where a state or a district could seek from the Secretary of Education or the Secretary of Transportation, whoever that might be for that program, an extension period. So under the previous administration, the Department of Education greatly expanded that discretion. And they made an argument that in addition to sort of the normal closeout and accounting processes, that in fact the Secretary of Education had the discretion to actually extend performance. They were doing this really intentionally. They recognized that they had pushed out an extraordinary amount of money out to school districts and states across the country in a very short amount of time, and they wanted to maximize the use of those funds. And there was also a recognition that the impacts of COVID-19 were far-reaching and much longer, right? So as we were coming to the end of our own ESSER funds, for context, school districts and the Agency of Education all inclusive received $500 million, so $500 million that we needed to absorb and use in a very, very short amount of time. Heather Boucher used to say that it was like stuffing an ostrich egg down a gopher snake's mouth, right? It was really challenging work. As we were coming to the end of that, I want to acknowledge our districts did a really good job of expending and using those funds. Of the $256 million of ARP ESSER funds, which was the bulk of what we received, they had only, I would say, left on the table, meaning they hadn't obligated through a contract or used the funds, only about $12 million. But they also were taking advantage of the liquidation extension, as we did at the state, to continue to maximize those funds. So for some districts, it was closing out construction projects because there'd been major workforce and supply issues for years. For some districts, it was continuing professional development opportunities to ensure that like students were receiving high quality instruction. There was also additional contracting for like mental health supports for students and educators. Like it was all the right use of funds. So there was about $17 million that was approved by the previous administration for liquidation extension. That included at the state level all of the funding that we were using for Read Vermont, which is our program that is meant to implement Act 139 to ensure that all schools are doing high quality literacy instruction. So no money came with Act 139, and so we were very resourceful and used these remaining federal dollars to do that. And so we had a liquidation extension approval through December of this year to extend that professional development, and it's been very, very successful. So under the new, so that's where we were all at, and everyone was chugging along and doing what they were supposed to be doing. The new administration on, I love to kind of tell this story, I think it's sort of classic. Ann and I were in Washington, D.C. for a conference. We actually had the opportunity to meet with Department of Education leadership, including Secretary McMahon. And I asked the question in a room full of people to the Deputy Secretary, one of the Deputy Secretaries, are you confirming that we will continue to have access to our liquidation extension funds? And she said, yes, I am 100% confirming that. By the time I got off the plane and I landed and, you know, took my phone off of airplane mode, my cell phone was exploding. And we were hearing rumors. At that point, Department of Ed had not released any communication that they were going to rescind it. So we very quickly, we had about 1.2 million that we at the state level had paid to districts for their allowable reimbursable costs. And we were sitting on it, right? And then the way that this works is the districts pay their invoices, then they submit to the Agency of Education, we pay the districts, and then we submit to the Department of Education and they pay us. It's all a reimbursement system that flows down. So we were sitting on $1.2 million that we had paid out. So our team scrambled got that submitted, we received a letter from the Department of Education at 5:03 p.m. saying that they had decided to reverse course and that anything submitted after 5 p.m., so again, 5:03 p.m., would basically not be honored. So we had gotten it in at like 4:58. And
Good work.
where that, yeah, and we actually have been reimbursed for that, which is, you know, a small miracle, frankly. Where that left us is that we had over 24 districts that had approved liquidation extensions, invoices that were paid, activities that were ongoing. At the state level, we had multiple contracts, again, paying invoices, activities ongoing, everything was approved. We had all followed our processes, and I would say Vermont did a very robust process on this. We actually did a really strong review. We ensured that everything was obligated correctly, it was allowable, it was, you know, answered all the right questions. So what they did is they implemented a new process at the discretion of the secretary. So basically said this was always at the discretion of the secretary, and the new secretary is basically saying no, they're not exercising their discretion on this. So they instituted a new process with entirely new criteria. And those criteria are not in any way connected to the original allowable costs of the program. It is entirely at the secretary's discretion, and that you had to resubmit. So it was like clean slate, nothing, no decisions before were counted, all new decisions. So we have been in the process of submitting these. We've been working with the districts. We've done weekly office hours. We've done a lot of one-on-one calls. And we have to submit what's called a project. I use air quotes because a project doesn't mean anything in any kind of federal definition. Everyone kind of comes up with their own definition. We have a form that's submitted. The 2 questions they have to answer are, how does this extension basically support the harm caused by COVID-19 for American students? That's the language. And then the second is, why should the secretary utilize her kind of discretionary authority to grant you this? So those are, again, totally new criteria that are not in any way hooked up to the original federal language. So we've been in the process of doing that. And we actually, I want to really acknowledge, we've had an amazing partnership with Senator Sanders' team. They came in, they said, what can we do to help? And our approach here has been that we want to submit the best rationales that we can. Our districts are incredibly busy and at capacity. We are also incredibly busy and at capacity. This is a lot of work. And so the Sanders team said, have your districts send us whatever they've got. We will help. We will help with data. We will help with edits, so that they're really strengthened. And they've been incredible. They've turned around dozens of requests. They've actually supported and helped some of the work that, like, I have 2 more to do after we're done with testimony today. They've been great in helping us run down, national data trends and other things. So I'm going to steal back my testimony for a sec. So as of May 19th, we had submitted 54 liquidation extension requests, 49 district level projects totaling about 9 million, and then 5 state level projects totaling about 1.2. We've got another batch that's going today. And there's an additional 24 projects, including 3 at the state level. The total for the batch that's going in today is 1.4 million. So all in, we're around the 10, 11, 12 million dollar. This is all invoices that districts or the state have paid. What we have heard, we have not yet received any determinations from any of the requests that we have sent in, but we are not hearing good news. So
From like other states that have done it.
other states, yeah, have received rejections. They tend to be topical or thematic. So, like, I guess the good news is there doesn't seem to be a red state, blue state sort of political determination. But the bad news is that the vast majority of them are getting rejected. So anything that is not direct services for students, so think about like tutoring programs, after-school programs, seem to be rejected. So professional development, construction, mental health supports for students, mental health supports for educators, those kinds of things. One of ours is actually a contract for the federally required annual performance reporting, which has been horribly burdensome for years. And we were like, great, we're gonna go ahead and get a contract for this. And thankfully they ended finally those annual performance reporting requirements. It's the only silver lining of this entire situation. But we had $150,000 of invoices that we had paid for federally required reporting. So the news is not great. And so I think it's just sort of important that we kind of bring forward and kind of lay this groundwork. We don't yet have a determination. We do know that Senator Sanders is in almost constant contact with Secretary McMahon, and we really appreciate his advocacy. But I think that we are looking at some pretty significant kind of financial exposure here for our districts. In particular, we have several that have construction projects, one of which is still ongoing, like ceilings open, classrooms not being used, and we're not hearing good news.
Senator Lyons?
Yeah.
Well, as you're talking, thank you for all the work that you're doing. It sounds like, in addition to doing what you're doing,
It's a bummer.
for Vermont,
It's a bummer to do it again.
got to
Right?
restructure your entire world.
Yeah.
And it does suggest that going forward, there will be some transfer of funds, some changes in budget line items, and a lot of that'll influence our work going forward. Yes, just to
I think that is
say that.
potentially possible, yes.
Yeah.
Why we're coming to House first, or Senator first, yeah.
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 Senator Watson?
Do you have a sense of the scale of exposure? Or, I mean, we can always talk about that at another time, but if you have a sense.
Yeah, so at the state level, it's about $2 million.
Okay.
And then I would say at the district level, it's probably about $10 million.
That's just for the liquidation, or is that what you're talking about? Or
Yeah, for the
Yeah.
liquidation, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and actually, I think that's my whole question.
We have, so the vast majority of what we're submitting for is for projects that have closed and are really, like the invoices have been paid, the work is done. There was a few that had ongoing contracts. So for example, for us, the Read Vermont work came to a screeching halt. So that really impactful coaching work that we've been doing in our districts stopped on March 28th. And we are now, and Anne's team has been incredible with this. We are looking for other funding to restart that work. We're going to have to reorganize how we're doing it, but we are leaving, in essence, about $750,000. That's going to have to go back to the federal government instead of using it for science of reading and improving literacy. So we are looking for other ways to fund that. We had at least one district that, because of the flooding last year, was not able to complete their after-school program. And so they submitted for a liquidation extension. They got it. They were doing an after-school program this summer. And we were able, the good news is when we recognized that this was happening, so they submitted for their extension, but we were actually able to reallocate some of the cannabis tax funded after school funds so that they can move forward. So that was great. But there are, in particular, there's 3 districts that have major construction projects to the tune of over $1 million.
I did have a second question, I just remembered it. And I don't want to put you in a weird place in answering this. I'm going to frame it so factually. Do you know if any other states are pushing back
Yes.
on this idea that it is the discretion changed? Do you know what I mean? That
Yeah. So 14 states submitted a lawsuit
Okay.
Yeah, the initial kind of determination coming out of a federal court is more technical in nature. It was like actually pointing to the sort of absurdity of them sending out this letter after the deadline had passed. And so it gave them an additional month, but that's sort of irrelevant because nobody was doing their contracted services after March 28th, right? But there is that lawsuit. And I think that I would say we are exploring all options available to us, but what's been really critical for us is that we get every submission in, that it be of high quality, so that we are best positioned in case of future.
And it is Attorney General Clark's, I'm not sure what the right word is, authority, prerogative to make a decision about whether to sign on to that or not, and as of right now, she is not.
As of right now, she has not. There is a conversation happening around maybe an additional, some other states. And as always, our general counsel works very closely with the AG's office. We actually have a member of the AG's office that sits on our staff. So we actually have very tight coordination around all things federal. So I think that's probably all I can say at this moment.
I understand. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's the ugly.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story.
And so it's the good news, back to that, is that the next school year is kind of covered at
Yes.
even at level funding. We won't really know for the next year until the FY 26, or they might just continue to do budget reconciliation.
Yeah, and Anne has sort of said in prior testimony, like, honestly, the longer they wait, the kind of better off we are, which sounds strange. But it actually, Anne, do you want to talk about it, like locks in our Medicaid, right? Like in early.
So, if a student is on Medicaid at 185% or 130% or less of poverty in July, that eligibility, that status as free meal eligible or reduced meal eligible will carry all the way through the school year. So once you're identified, even if you later lose eligibility or go off the program, you still have that eligibility for the year. So if they can't resolve the reconciliation bill and get it signed by the president before July, and even if there were significant Medicaid changes, if students are eligible on July 1, if they're reported to us as eligible on July 1 from DEVA, then they're going to carry that eligibility all year. So the other thing is that if they can't get a federal budget for FY26, federal FY26, which would be school year 26-27, done by the deadline of October 1, and they have to do another continuing resolution, that also would not be the end of the world for us, because generally those are, you just continue current funding for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. So rather than seeing cuts immediately, we might be able to, have a series of continuing resolutions that, just keep kicking the can down the road. So delays are not a bad thing in this case, in either the reconciliation or the federal FY26 budget.
Okay, so that's a little bit of good, I guess.
The uncertainty is sort of horrible,
yeah.
But, and it's always, we sort of joke at the agency that right now we dread Friday between 4 and 5 p.m. because that's almost always when the next horrible thing comes down. But in this case, delay is only to our benefit. Yeah. Any other questions for us? So our plan, we probably will not receive a determination before you all are out. So our plan has been that we will, keep JFO, Joint Fiscal Committee, the E-Board kind of apprised of anything that's going on during when you all are out of session. And we'll be back early next session.
And do you do this for education committees too? Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Great. Well,
thank you all.
Yeah.
I know you probably have a long rest of your day. So
Thank
I'm going to go submit my remaining liquidation extensions.
Good luck.
Is what I need to get to. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Enjoy the
Bye.
lunch.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye. Thank you, Anne.
Bye.